earlier with stuff like that. And while this was going on, I don't know why I did it. I got into a pair of gloves myself, and I snuck up behind George, just kidding, and yelled, "Hey, George!" and let go with a sort of roundhouse right. Just kidding.
Yeah.
And George wheeled around real quick and caught it right in the jaw. Pow! He caught it right in the jaw. And he was off balance. He must have been. And then he landed flat in a huckleberry bush. It was awful, really. It was funny. It was funny. I think it's colored our whole lives.
Oh, you're dead.
Where'd you get that, you bastard?
You like that?
Oh, you
bastard.
never been so frightened.
You like that?
Oh, that was pretty good. Give me kisses. Give me a kiss.
Oh, boy.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies, and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of coloniabook.com, and this is my good friend and co-host, Margot D. of Brooklyn Fit Chick.
Hi, everyone.
It's a very rainy New Year here in California. We were just saying before we got on the air. Welcome. We also were saying we have a lot of new followers. We have 5 new Patreon members. So if you joined us over the holiday season, we are so glad that you're here. We are looking forward to 2023 with you. Just so you know, like, you're probably wondering if you saw the title of this episode, whether this was a book. It wasn't.
Right.
We decided when the pandemic started, we decided to do a brand new episode every single week. And so that means that we are considering any literary source. So as long as the movie has been adapted from a literary source, as long as it's streamable, it's easy for everybody to get, we will consider it. So we decided, and I don't know if we announced this last time or not, but we're going to be doing all dramas, or not all dramas, but all plays in June, non-musical plays.
January.
Musicals. June. Did I say June?
You said June?
Oh,
sorry, guys.
I'm a little tired, y'all. Sorry about it.
She was in the middle of a storm in Sacramento last week, everybody.
I was.
It's been crazy here.
I'm okay, but those poor people, I'll keep them in your thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little out of it. I'm a little like, what day is this? It's January.
Yes.
It's January. We are doing all plays in January. Not musicals, though, because we do musicals in March.
Right.
But we've never done a month where we've done all straight plays, non-musical plays. And boy, we have a doozy of a one that we're kicking it off with today. But before we get to that, if you would like to meet other listeners of this podcast, if you've got suggestions for plays or books or movies that you would like us to consider, there's a few places where you can do that, meet other listeners, interact with us on the internet.
We do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it. All the episodes are posted there. But we have a private Facebook group, and that's the best place to interact with Margot and I, and also interact with other listeners and come up with suggestions. We also are on Twitter and Instagram, Book versus a Movie, spelled it all out. Please be sure to follow us there. We have an old-timey email, Book versus Movie Podcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. You can send suggestions there. If you would like some stickers, we can send you some stickers in the mail wherever you are in the world. And we just ask that the literary source be something we can get our hands on pretty easily. We were going to finish December with That Darn Cat because of Disney December. And we might even jettison that one, sorry, but we both eventually got the book, and it's, wow.
It's not good. Just spoiler alert.
I kept getting the 1965 book, compilation thing with the movie. I got it like 3 times. I'm going to put it in my free library. But anyway, it has to be something we can get our hands on. It's a magazine article, whatever. Just we have to be able to get our hands on it. And then the movie has to be on a major streaming app, and that can include YouTube. If we have to buy the DVD or something, it's just not going to work out. And so this movie is streaming on HBO Max. It's also streaming in other spots. Book is super easy to get your hands on. Also, Margot, I did get a copy of the book, but in 1963, there was a cast recording in a recording studio of this play.
Yeah.
with Uta Hagen and Paul Hiller.
know.
That's what I listened to this on, and it was spectacular. So,
Oh, was it? I didn't get a
Yes.
chance to hear it. I'm sure it
So
had to have been.
we'll talk
Wow.
about that in a second. But so those are all the places you can follow us, and be sure to give us your suggestions and ideas in those places. And Margot, like you mentioned, we have 5 new Patreon members, and it's because we decided to put out all of our Christmas episodes in 1 month, and then hopefully we'll have some new ideas for next year. But that seemed to really catch on with people. They seemed to really like that. We got a lot of listeners saying that they were putting up their Christmas trees and putting up their decorations and listening to us, which was great. But I want to thank Kevin, Jackie, Allison, Christiane, and Bruce for all joining our Patreon page. We put up all the episodes are going up there from 2020 and then previous to that. And it just helps us pay the cost for books and movies. And sometimes we get 3 books sent to us that we don't need. But anyway, it helps with the cost for like the streaming services and things like that, and just the hosting cost for the show. So thank you all so much for that. But, we want to say this, if money is tight, and believe me, we both understand when that's the case, just leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, or leave us stars, or, just hit the button that says like wherever you get your podcast. That would be amazing. We've been thirsty for iTunes reviews. So if you give us a 5-star review, we'll mention you on the air.
We were just saying before we got on the air that we are now the age of the main characters.
We're not millennials, in case you're wondering.
Oh boy, I remember watching this when I was. I liked it. I was a bit of a drama geek, and I know what I was going to say. I mentioned to my daughter, who's in college right now, that we were doing this book and movie. She had never seen the movie, and she's never seen a production of it, but she read it. She was like, "Oh, I read that. It's hilarious." And I was like,
What?
Really?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, it's so funny." And I get, and the thing is, I'd never read the play without having seen the movie. And so I had to go back and look at it. I was like, okay, well, if I didn't know anything about this and I was just reading it cold, it does read very funny. You could certainly, there's a lot more potential for levity there than we'll be discussing today. Interesting guy, Edward Albee. And the thing about Edward Albee for me, and we're going to talk about his career in a minute, but the thing about him is like, he's a person, I can never get a beat on what he looks like. Mm-hmm. To me, his appearance has changed dramatically throughout his life. Like, I will constantly see a picture of,
Yes.
from the theater, from Broadway and stuff like that. And I'm like, who's that guy? It's Edward Albee, like 9 times out of 10, but he looks completely different. He's just one of these people whose face changes a lot, as he ages. Like, he looks like 4 different guys depending on when you're looking at him.
I know, we look the same like, since we've met each other. Yeah, there's a very handsome picture of him on the Wikipedia page, but
it's a very good looking photo of him. But if you look at his collected works are in like at least 3 volumes. It looks like 3 different guys.
Yeah,
like, it's hard to believe it's the same guy. But yeah, that picture, that's a really cool picture of him if you look at his Wikipedia page. So let's talk about Mr. Albee. I believe I saw him in person when I was a kid. He had a foundation that he started, actually, I think from the royalties from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And among the things that the foundation funded, I don't know if they still do this, but they had a young playwrights competition. And he went to a couple of places here in San Diego. I don't know if it was nationwide, but he had it here in San Diego. And he went to a couple of different places and spoke about it in person. And in my memory of it, I have to ask my mom if I'm remembering this accurately. I kind of remember him coming to promote this competition. But here's the thing. I didn't enter the competition or anything like that. But one of the winners of the competition is my husband.
What?
Yeah. He was a kid. I think he was in, I didn't even know if he was in high school yet. And he wrote a play about interestingly, he wrote a play about his parents' divorce.
Oh my God.
His parents' marriage was breaking up at the time. And that's not what's funny, but he wrote this play about it, about what that was like. And, won, and they produced the play. Told me about like how hard it was, like this play about how difficult this is on the kids with his parents like sitting there watching
Wow.
unfold on the stage. But anyway, that's my little Edward Albee story. Yeah, and in my memory, like I have a hard time placing his face. But I seem to remember him. I don't know where I saw him speak. If it was at a museum that my parents took me to, something like that he was talking about this competition. Anyway,
wow.
I have a little clipping somewhere from when Todd won the Edward Albee Young Playwrights competition. But speaking of young playwrights, I mean, he was a guy who hit success pretty early on. And this is probably the work that he's most known for.
I would say so. So he was born Edward Franklin Albee, 1928, from D.C. He was adopted at a very young age, a wealthy couple who, I mean, he went to the best schools. He went to Choate. He went to all these like very fancy pants schools, never quite fit in. And because he was homosexual, queer. So his parents wanted him to be, as he said, like a corporate vulture, and he wanted to be creative and be an artist and write. And so that's what he did. He moved to Greenwich Village. He made friends. He took odd jobs and just started writing. And this is one of his first plays, if it's not his very first play. He was in his 30s. There was a couple before.
If I remember correctly, Albee is the name of his adopted father, right? It's not his born name. And he was adopted wasn't he adopted like into a theater family?
It was a vaudeville family. And so I think his mother died young, or his father left the mother, but he was adopted into this vaudeville family, but they wanted him to work on the business side of things. And he was much more of he moves to New York City after college. He wants to be a dramatist. He wants to be a writer. And he writes a couple of plays. There's the Zoo Story, and then there's the Sandbox. This book comes out. They call it the book, by the way, in the play when you're talking about the actual play. So it does kind of fit what we're doing. But this is written and performed in 1962. So it's based a little bit on Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? The Big Bad Wolf, which is a Disney production. And he said he saw graffiti somewhere of somebody wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and he thought it was hilarious and thought it would make for a good title. It probably was something he also read in New York Magazine, because supposedly in New York Magazine in 1957, there was some comment about that. Like there was a bathroom in the Village. Of course, it was in the Village. Everything happened in the Village back then. But this is a story, and this is a theme we've talked about many, many times in the podcast, but mid-century America, there was all this idea of analysis coming out, and Freudian analysis, Jungian analysis, people going into therapy. And then there's couples therapy. There's also this idea of post-war America, especially in the 1950s. There's the man in the gray suit and all these Betty Friedan and all these ideas of like, you must get married, you must get a job, you must have children, you must live in the suburbs. That's where everybody's doing. That's what we do now. And there's a lot of couples who were like, this isn't me. I'm not happy in this. I'm not sure I want to be married. I don't know if I want to have kids. I don't know if I want to live in Long Island. Maybe I want to stay in the city forever, or maybe I want to do this or do that. And he based this on a couple that were friends of his and I'm not going to say their names because I can't remember it, but it's here in Wikipedia.
It's Willard Moss.
Okay.
And Marie Mencken. And Moss was a professor.
Okay.
And Mencken was rather a well-known
artist, right?
Yeah, she was I guess we would call nowadays an indie and avant-garde filmmaker. She was a huge influence and friend of Andy Warhol. And she was one of the first filmmakers to kind of really utilize the handheld camera technique. And her stuff gets shown at museums a lot. Guess where they lived?
Upper West Side? San Diego? No, where?
Brooklyn.
Oh, probably Brooklyn Heights, right?
Yes, they lived in Brooklyn Heights.
That would make sense.
Yeah, and so yeah, they were just because it's interesting as it relates to the play. So this was an older intellectual couple in New York City. They probably would have been sort of elder statespeople of the Greenwich Village scene, that was going on. There were a lot of queer exploration. The Beat generation, especially like in writing, there's a lot of exploration of queer culture going on. The husband, who, as I say, he was a professor of literature at Wagner College, Willard Moss. He was probably gay, reportedly had dalliances with a lot of young men. Don't know if Edward Albee was one of those young men, but he certainly knew them. And Marie Mencken apparently was just like, this was the kind of marriage that they had. So it was an unconventional marriage. It was not a marriage that followed the gender norms. And yes, they purportedly would have these like verbal attacks at each other in front of just whomever happened to be around. And they did use the term, quote unquote, exercising, meaning like exercising their minds and their demons and their wits with each other. They are the inspiration, if you will, of George and Martha. But interestingly, as I said, Marie Mencken was someone who had a career of her own, right? And quite an accomplished career by this point. By the time that he's writing this play, she was quite highly regarded in artistic circles in New York, at least. So, very interesting couple and quite influential from what I've been able to find out. But yeah, they lived, I have the address here somewhere. I'll put the picture up in our Facebook group, because the building is still there. It's a really cool looking building. And you can just imagine like Edward Albee and Andy Warhol and all these people, young people from the time going to the home of these intellectuals and having these pseudo salons talking about busting gender norms and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting time in our culture. Well, especially in New York.
Margot mentions Brooklyn. Well, A, because I'm from Brooklyn, but B, because I wrote a book called Filmed in Brooklyn, so it makes sense that she's a filmmaker there. And I did a talk recently at someone's home in Brooklyn. I think it was Pierpont Street. And of course, I went home and looked on Zillow to see how much the apartments are going for. Like several $1 million. We should also say, this was one of my mom's favorite plays. And it was funny because my mom and dad had a really good marriage. But they would talk about, especially, they said couples used to fight all the time. Like they didn't hide their fighting or their contempt. Like nowadays, we understand that contempt is a really bad sign in a marriage, that it needs to be worked out. I think, when people didn't get divorced as often, you got married much younger, you could make some really poor choices. And here you are, you could feel stuck with somebody, and how do you work it out? You yell at each other. It's one of those ways you could sort of work it. So that's sort of a thing. We all also haven't we all been at a dinner with a couple that hates each other, and you could just feel,
or even if you just observe them when you're out somewhere. We've all seen them.
The play is a huge hit. George and Martha, we could say it's part of George and Martha Washington. This is an Atlantic coastal elites, as we say nowadays, this couple. The play is such a huge success. It's 3 hours, and you have like a little bit of an intermission, which is long for a drama. It's like, the musicals can go on that long, usually because of all the staging and stuff like that. It does so well that it's nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for drama. This play was considered so scandalous. The words that were used, the sexuality that's mentioned.
It's so tame compared to nowadays.
When I was young, I remember people like, oh, this movie's going on television. Kids can't watch it. Do you remember that?
There's no nudity.
None.
The swearing is all swearing that would be allowed on network television today.
Yes.
It's not, there's nothing that they could show it at 8 p.m. on any major network.
Yeah.
Any day of the year.
It's just kind of hilarious. But it was nominated. So it won the Tony Award for Best Play, and it has Uta Hagen as one of the actors. It does so well. First, they have to add an afternoon performance, so they have to hire a whole other cast just to do an afternoon show. And made so much money that it didn't win the Pulitzer Prize, by the way, because the Pulitzer Prize committee was so scandalized by this. So they just recommend. So they didn't even give out an award that year. It's so funny. So then a year later, 1963, they do this, and I put this in our Facebook group. They went into a recording studio and recorded the play like you would do a radio show. Mm-hmm. The entire production. And then that became a smash hit. And I said,
It's really something.
yeah. And I'm like, why didn't they do that for all the Broadway plays? Because not everybody could afford to come to New York. Not everyone. Yeah, I would love this. I mean, to have like this kind of content. But
Sure.
so I
can
listened to it.
imagine. I mean, I'm trying to think of like what it must have been like to have been a contemporary audience going and seeing something like this. Did it feel shocking to the audience, or was it more like, whoa, they're saying what we're all thinking?
Right.
You know, I don't know. I really wonder about that. I have no way of knowing that. But and why was it such a juggernaut? You know, I mean, it's super good. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
When you read it, the writing, he is a very good writer. The writing is absolutely superb. You know, even just as I mentioned, like my daughter reading it and thinking it was funny. Like, yeah, when you just look at it on the page, there's a lot of wit there.
Right.
You know, these two, he's writing two people who are much older than he is at the time, who are super smart and very privileged people who have had a great deal of education, and they are using all of their brain power against each other.
Right.
And he's right. It's so well written. It's really beautifully written. But I do wonder, like, what was it that just set audiences on fire for this thing so much?
He wrote several other, plays, and he dabbled in many other things, but this is the one thing he's mostly known for. I'm sure he kind of lived off this. He lived in Montauk for most of his life. So let's get into the movie, because as we said, the play, the original play, and it's on YouTube. That's how I listened to it. I mean, I have the book and I read it along with the movie, but the play that they had, there was a few things they changed to the movie. We'll get to the movie in a second, but the play comes out 1962, and it's Uta Hagen, who's amazing, and Arthur Hill, and then Ben Piazza. And this play is about basically this couple. They're a New England couple. They're middle-aged. She's in her 40s. He's in his 50s, like a few years older than her. And they are at a party, and then they're coming home from the party, and they're both drunk, and they're a little bit miserable. And she says, oh, by the way, this couple is coming over, this young couple. They just are joined university. He's going to be teaching at the university. I said, come in for a nightcap. And her husband's like, why? And she's like, because she wants the party to keep going. They don't want to be alone with each other, I guess.
That seems to be part of it, doesn't it? I mean, and I can't remember if this is in the play or if it's only in the movie, but the movie, I know when the movie starts, it's like 2:30 in the morning when we start.
Yes. So what are they up to,
late.
this new couple? Who are young?
We're young. Yeah. So the young couple, the young professor, I think, is the same age that Edward Albee is when he's writing this play. Mm-hmm. The play is in 3 acts. The first act is called Fun and Games. The second act is called, so they, it's late. It's after this party. They come in and they're drunk. I mean, they've been drinking. It was what we know as an audience is, number 1, it is late. Number 2, they've been drinking. Number 3, this is not rare, mm-hmm. right? And that they get drunk and then they take little jabs at each other. And then Martha says to George, like, oh, don't forget that couple's coming over. It's 2:30 in the morning. Don't forget that couple's coming over. They're coming over for basically a little after party. George is a professor, as was his inspiration. But in the play, Martha is the daughter of the president of the university. Gather they've been married for a long time. So she is someone who has had a life of privilege, but not really a career or kind of ambitions of her own per se. And he is someone who clearly has had some ambition, but it seems that they have not been realized in the way that he would have wanted. It's what we get all in the first act, just by the way that they talk to each other, the state of their house. It's sort of bohemian, but it's also kind of ratty, shabby. It should be nicer than it is. Even if it's eclectic, it should be nicer than it is. It's kind of yuck. Yeah. So the young people show up, and they're also quite tipsy, but apparently they just, everybody just drives around tipsy on this college campus, I guess.
I guess you can't hit too many people at
with
this time of
impunity.
night. Yes.
Okay.
There's young couple. It's Nick, and Honey.
Yeah, Nick and Honey.
Nick and Honey, and he's like 30, almost 30 years old, and she's a couple years younger than that. They're from the Midwest. They're blonde and dewy-eyed, and they're newlywed-ish, and they've only been married a little while, and they just seem like, oh, it's so nice that you're inviting us over. The last place we went to, nobody would talk to us, and this is so friendly, and we're so excited to be here. And George and Martha proceed to make them miserable pretty quickly. They realize, like, oh shit, this is like, excuse me, this is not going to be
a word that's not in the play,
right? By the way, right. We're not here just for a tipple and then a laugh and then we're going to go on our merry way and make plans for dinner the next time. It's very much like George and Martha are just like, you're trapped. They set the mouse trap. And so this couple's in there and they see that they're young and they seem to be happy with each other. And so they're sort of testing them. Are you happy? What do you want from life?
So how do you think things are going to go between you two young little blonde, fair-haired, blue-eyed young people? So that's the Martha, I think each time it's like Martha is the one who kind of keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And in the first act, she tells the story. I suddenly don't remember if this story is in the movie, but she tells the story about punching George.
Yes, it is in the movie.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
In front of her dad. And her dad is like a big figure in this play. Well, he never appears. He comes up over and over again because he's the he's the king of this kingdom in which they all live, all these four people. And George just like shows up with a gun while she's telling this humiliating story about him to strangers in his house.
Right.
He walks in and he's got a gun. And as an audience, you're like, whoa, this is going to take a terrible turn. But then it doesn't.
Right. He's
basically like, doesn't it have it has the little bang thing?
It has a little bang thing, or sometimes I read that it has flowers that come out.
Yeah, it's a phony baloney gun. It's not a for real gun.
Right, but she's saying...
So we're like...
Right, and she's not sure, are you in the history department? And he keeps saying biology. I'm in the biology department. And then she's asking about Honey, and I guess that's not her real name, but nobody really says her name. This is a whole thing. Her dad runs the whole place. She married George. George turned into a flop. And George is this guy who's only in his 40s and looks just twice as old.
Much older
from the drinking and from the misery. And he wanted more for himself. He wanted to write fiction, but his father-in-law said no. He thought he'd run the department one day, but he hasn't. He's not. Clearly, he's not. He's just another worker there. And they don't seem to have kids. I mean, it just seems to be just the two of them. No pets, nothing. And when you look at the play, the directions are that it's just them in this one room. They don't really go anywhere else. So that's like one of the big differences. They start talking to this couple, and they're getting them drunker and drunker. And then they kind of separate them from each other. And then so George is finding out from Honey that she told Nick that she was pregnant. That's why they had to get married. And then she said it must have been a hysterical pregnancy. I must have thought I was pregnant, but I wasn't. And then so George is making her think, oh, did you trap him into marrying you? And then Martha is flirting with Nick. You know, she's DTF for Nick. Like she's coming on to him and sort of letting him know, like, you can have this if you want this.
Yeah. And I could do things for you. I could open doors for you.
Right. Just like, that, because Honey is sweet, but Honey is also very, very, maybe naive, maybe sheltered, not a fighter.
No,
not like
she is way in over her head here, and she's also quite tipsy.
She's quite tipsy. She's tiny. They talk about how thin she is and how she's slight. And she's tipsy, and she kind of like, and it's, once again, this is 1962. Like, this is kind of like what you did. Your husband got a job at a campus somewhere, and you're just going to be the sweet little wifey. And then when they're separated, then they come back together. And that's when Honey says, oh, actually, Honey went off with Martha first and then comes back and says, hey, she told me about your son, that you have a son. And that's when George really turns.
Loses it. Yeah. So Act 2 is called, I'm going to attempt to pronounce this. Act 2 is called Walpurgisnacht.
Better than me.
Whew. I'm sure I did that. I'm sure I just butchered that.
We're sorry, Germany.
Sorry, German speaking folks. So it's the name for a witches meeting, you know, like a gathering of witches. In other words, a party for, you know, from which no good can come. And it opens with George and Nick. They're sort of, and it's when you see, it depends on which version you're seeing of this, it's staged differently, but they're like outside of the house. They're like on the porch. A lot of the times it's like that they're sitting outside on the porch, and they're sharing a little bit about their backgrounds. George, you don't quite know what George is after. Like, is it that he sees himself in Nick? Is he genuinely, you have to remember, like, George didn't invite these people.
No, he wants to go to bed.
Right. So he as he should. It's
right.
2:30 in the morning.
He's drunk. It's 2:30 in the morning. He should drink a big glass of water, go to bed.
Dude, self-care.
Self-care.
So what's his angle? Like, why is he bothering to talk to this guy? You can't help but wonder. But he shares a story, a deeply personal story from his childhood about a friend of his who, spoiler alert, accidentally, through a series of events, kills one of his parents and then kills the other of his parents. Seemingly opens himself up to Nick. And then Nick, in turn, his guard is kind of down. And so he also kind of opens up about how he had married Honey, thinking she was pregnant, but it turned out to be not a real pregnancy. Or perhaps it was. I mean, we don't know.
We don't know.
In any case, there's no child. It was a situation that did not produce a child, but it did produce a marriage. But he doesn't seem to have
resentment.
No, resentment or contempt for her. He does, however, he says her father is quite wealthy. So similar to the situation that George is in, he has a father-in-law who was wealthy and powerful. Although I think the father-in-law's passed away at this point. Anyway, the father-in-law was a preacher, evangelist, kind of swindler type, I think we can say. Made a great deal of money. So Honey, for all her mousy spinelessness, has a very large bank account. So I don't know. It's hard to get a read on these two men, and why are they sharing these things with each other? Why did they make the choices that they made? It's difficult to know. I, for the first time reading and watching this, and I'm sure there must be like people who do their PhD on stuff like this. There's certainly many academic papers out there about this play and challenging gender norms and the roles of women. Some people call it the first feminist Broadway hit or whatever. But I do want, there is just a whiff of an idea that George may not be completely heterosexual to me, right?
Sure.
There's a thing that Martha says. I can't remember what it is, but she mentions something about it. And I don't know. There was a little something there, I felt. But I could be reading into it. But anyway, this is the first time I ever looked at this movie and read this and thought like,
yeah,
I don't remember noticing that before. So I don't know, it
right.
could be. But as we said, the inspiration that it seems that he was gay. But so the men are sharing. And then Martha is forever like holding a glass and screaming George's name into the night. Apparently they not only can like drive around drunk with no problem, they can just like scream they have no neighbors, I guess. They could just scream into the night. But also also she's the president's daughter. Like, what are
Right.
people going to do? They're going to call the cops on her? I don't think so. So interesting dynamic. And Martha presumably is inside with Honey telling her who knows what. Oh, Honey's being sick at this point.
Right. Well,
Right?
she gets
Honey's
upset.
puking.
Yeah, she gets upset. I mean, because they're revealing things that they didn't want to. And then Honey's upset because they know about the hysterical pregnancy. And Martha just needs a little bit of information. That's all a currency she needs. And then she just kind of goes in on Honey. And so then there's a whole thing where there's dancing, and Martha's dancing for Nick, and she wants George to dance with her, and George won't dance. So Martha and Nick are dancing, and she's, gyrating and flirting with him. She changes her outfit at one point, so she was wearing something a little
she
more
puts on a
dowdy.
sexier.
Yeah, more ample outfit too, and is very, very flirty with him. And so then
And
right in front
very
of
demonstrable.
George.
Yeah, it's all for George's benefit entirely.
And so George is pretending to read something else and not care, but he's inside, he's fuming. Just to move it along, there's another point. So then Nick and Martha disappear together, and that's when George and Honey have a conversation, and now Honey's feeling insecure about her situation with her husband because where did he go? And they hear a crashing sound. She's like, what's that? But they come back, and then on top of everything, Martha has to let everybody know that she and Nick were upstairs. They were DTF, but Nick was too drunk to perform. And so she's humiliating
She's
Nick.
got to tell everybody. about it now.
She's got to let him know. And then George is really furious now. So he's like, guess what? Our son died. I just got the telegraph this afternoon.
Yeah.
And so then she's like, how dare you? You can't say that. And so he starts describing, and then they're going back and forth. And this is when Nick finally, he's coming around, and he realizes, like, oh my God, these people have made up this son, that it's not real. It's just this game that they play. And then he grabs Honey. He's like, we got to get out of here. These people are nuts. They're cuckoo. And so they leave. And then George and Martha, and she's saying, like, why'd you do that? Because the whole thing was that they never talked about their son to other people. It was their secret.
It was a thing that they
had
between them.
Codependency.
Yeah, and we should say too that so Act 1 was, again, just to review. Act 1 is called Fun and Games. Act 2 is the Witch's Night, and Act 3 is called The Exorcism. And so, Fun and Games are over now,
right?
And George is just, okay, we're putting it out there. Well, let's really put it all out there. Guess what? Our son is dead. And, at first Nick and Honey are like, why is he, like, what kind of a guy would, like, what are you doing?
Sit on this information, this whole party?
Yeah, and also you're telling her like this? Like,
right.
This is your son. And Nick, who is is the audience kind of surrogate in a way, he is the one who, like, slowly puts it together, like, oh, I see.
Yeah.
I don't know why Nick and Honey stick around for so long.
They're wasted. I think maybe they don't have a car. Maybe they took a cab there.
I think they don't have a car. I think you're right. And I think also there's also a little bit like, he's the new professor. This is the president's daughter. Like, we're going
to be here for a couple of years at least.
Yeah, we got to try to make nice. Yeah. How far does that go?
Right.
But so then, and throughout the play, we should say also that, as they're exchanging, it's such an interesting dynamic. As they're exchanging this venom with each other, George and Martha, they do have these moments where you have these, like, that are clearly these shared moments of warmth that they're referring to, and they every now and each one or the other or both of them kind of gets pulled into these little warm moments of, somebody brings up something that reminds them of a happier time, and this kind of happens over and over again. And yeah, so George, Martha just completely comes apart at the seams. Everything is now just destroyed for her, and she just really, and she who has been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing through the whole thing, she's done. She could no longer. He's just completely pulled the rug out from under her, and Nick and Honey. I think it's dawn by this time.
Right.
they finally like okay,
This is a good time to
it's time
check
for
out.
us to go. We're gonna just bow out now, because what would happen next? I don't know. What could possibly,
They're gonna have breakfast
what else
together.
could
What's
possibly?
gonna?
I don't know. Phew. So they go. We don't get the impression. One of the things is Honey is, as we said, very tipsy throughout. She's not entirely aware of like her husband going upstairs with the university president's daughter to have sex. Like she's not really grasping everything that's going on. When George is like, I got a telegram. She's like, oh yeah, he got a telegram.
She takes people at their word.
She does.
Yeah.
And so therefore, we have reason to believe that this is not a night that maybe totally destroyed their lives. Maybe not, but definitely a shot across the bow. So at the end, it's really heartbreaking. Like, Martha's done. The game has been given up. They do not have a son. And of course it ends with George singing "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf," and the last line is "I am." Martha says, "I am," and that's the play. I mean, it's very powerful. Even today, it's a super powerful play.
It's yes. I mean, people walked out of there probably felt like they were run over by a car.
I'm sure
There was nothing like this then. There's certainly no movie like this or TV show that even comes close to this kind of a performance. It ends on a downer. They were living this life of illusion. Do they keep the illusion going? Do they make up a new one? Do they go to a better place? Does it stay as it is? Who knows? That's their whole thing.
Yeah. The one, I mean, like if you want to call on a right spot, is that it would seem they're no longer lying to each other.
Or unless they create a new lie.
Right, which they are.
They could wake up and decide to do that. Remember our daughter? The one at Vassar?
Remember our daughter?
Yeah. I don't know.
Wasn't she great? Too bad we didn't pay more attention to her.
Right.
Yeah, you just don't know with these two is the thing. It's a wallop of a play. It's really something.
There's been several notable revivals. Apparently Henry Fonda and Richard Burton tried to recruit people to do it, but the one I saw was in 2005, which was with Kathleen Turner as Martha, Bill Irwin as George, Muriel Enos as Honey, and then David Harbour as Nick. I didn't know. At the time, no, it was 2005. I think my friend and I even showed up late. We didn't realize like you had to be there at 8:00, like on the dot. Like we might have been a couple minutes late. So I'll never forget that, like kind of the stink eye that we got for that. And there was in 2005. It's notable because they revised the script. And that's the one they've been using to this day. And so there's certain things that have been removed. But let's go into, and it's Steppenwolf Company has done it. And
yeah, we should say also, interestingly, it was done with Mike Nichols and Elaine May.
Elaine May in New Haven in 1980. Patrick Stewart, Mercedes Ruehl did a version in Minneapolis.
Oh, that must have been something.
Which would have been so great. I mean, there's been so many. Meg Tilly, we love Meg Tilly. Mm-hmm. She did a version. There was also on The Simpsons. There was going to be one before COVID hit.
I love that one.
The one with
Here's
the
your
Simpsons.
crown, your majesty. Todd and I do that all the time.
I'll play that before the end credits. There was going to be a version in 2010. It was going to have Laurie Metcalf and Rupert Everett.
Oh, man.
But it was also produced by Scott Rudin, so that would have eventually, that's another story. But because of COVID, they canceled that. So I'm sure it'll be done again. I mean, this is like right now. So I don't know if you saw this too. Callista Flockhart is doing a version in LA at the Geffen Theater.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
So Zachary Quinto plays George and she plays Martha, and they're getting rave reviews at the Geffen Theater. So if I were in LA, I would go see it. But let's talk about the movie, which comes out in 1966, 67?
Yes, 66.
66, wow. So let's do this. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll play this very interesting trailer.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf. Who's afraid of Virginia?
It's easy to talk about Warner Brothers' new motion picture, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It's hard to tell about it. Easy to talk about. All you have to say is Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton.
Who's afraid of
He's the associate professor of history. She's his wife. The essence of Ivy League charm to students and friends who don't know them well. George Segal, Sandy Dennis are the newcomers led by their charming host and hostess to the hell that hides behind those ivy-clad university walls.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? So early in the morning. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Edward Albee wrote the play, the most acclaimed work by this controversial author. Ernest Lehman wrote the screenplay. He did the same for West Side Story and Sound of Music. Mike Nichols directs. His unbroken series of theatrical triumphs have given him a position without peer or rival. All you have to say is Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, George Segal, Sandy Dennis, Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. After that, all you can say is incredible.
So Mike Nichols, we talked about before. We talked about The Graduate. That's one of our least favorite books, and that was a great movie. Do you remember that book being a stinker?
Movie. He's super good at looking at some source material, and we also
and everything.
Didn't we do
Barefoot in the Park?
We did Barefoot in the Park, but we also did with John Travolta playing Bill Clinton.
Oh, you're right. Primary Colors. Yeah, we're talking about Mike Nichols, who's like, I read his biography. He's
what a
just
genius.
I mean, there's not even that's not even like a big enough word for him.
It's not. He's such a brilliant man. It's like he's like Five Guys. The things that this guy did, and but it's so sharp and so able to look at some source material and just completely laser in on what are the things that the audience are going to connect with on a human level. The Graduate, if you've never read it, don't. It's a terrible book. It's one of the worst books we've ever done, and that is saying something. And but he looked at that book, that awful book, and was like, there's a story in here that, if we just tweak it this way and that way and dial this up and dial that down, wow, we've got a really amazing human story here. And this is a similar situation where but in this case, and this is a little bit, but this is different because The Graduate, one of the things about the book, The Graduate, was that nobody had read it because it was terrible. Because it was so bad, it didn't sell well. And so only a tiny amount of people had actually read it and knew the book. In this situation, you have a play, like Margot was saying, so many people saw it, and then so many people bought the record. People knew this play in a way that was very unusual for the time. And so he's dealing with from kind of like when people are adapting Gone with the Wind. Right. He's dealing with material that is very familiar to the audience that he's going to be presenting it to. And yet he still manages to surprise you. He still manages to direct these performances. Every single person in this is so brilliant. Every single one is absolutely critical to the success of the whole thing.
Hey, you played football, huh?
Well, yes, I was a quarterback, but I was much more adept at boxing, really.
Boxing? You hear that, George?
Yes, Martha?
You must have been pretty good at it. You don't look like you got hit in the face at all.
He was intercollegiate state and middleweight champion.
Honey.
Well, you were.
You still look like you have a pretty good body now, too. Is that right? Have you?
Martha, decency forbids.
Shut up. Is that right? Have you kept your body?
It's still pretty good. I work out.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yes. He has a very firm body.
Have you? Oh, I think that's very nice.
Well, you never know. You know, once you have it...
You never know when it's going to come in handy.
I was going to say, why give it up until you have to?
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more.
Martha, your obscenity is beyond human.
George here doesn't cotton too much to body talk. Paunchy here isn't too happy when the conversation moves to muscle. How much do you want?
It's basically 4 main characters, as we've said. And if any one of them is even off their game a tiny bit, the whole thing falls apart. And it never does. You are on the edge of your seat, even though you know what's going to happen. You are on the edge of your seat for the whole thing. I've seen this movie many times, and each time I'm like, oh gosh, what's going to happen?
Honey, get out of there. Get
out of there.
You're so sweet.
Girl,
don't put up with this.
run.
Don't run. Yeah, it's so Ernest Lehman adapted the screenplay and they made some different changes. It's in black and white, which wasn't popular at the time. I think we talked about it. In Cold Blood was
No.
produced at the same time. It was also in black and white.
And that was also, people thought it was a crazy choice.
Right. But it's actually, I think, a brilliant choice, especially with this film, because our 2 leads are Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was maybe 32, 33, and he was only like 41, 42.
He turned 40 on the set. So they're both playing quite a bit older than they are. And yeah, if it had been in color, I think her
We'd see all
makeup
of it.
would it'd be a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
But it really sells it to the audience. They made... We're not going to get into the whole Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor marriage saga. Although I will say it is one of my favorite issues of Vanity Fair ever is the Vanity Fair issue about when she made Cleopatra. And it's about all of that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
those 2 made, how many pictures? Like almost a dozen.
Yeah, I think it was like 11.
Yeah. And he was a highly respected Shakespearean actor. For those of you who don't know, he was definitely like put on par with Laurence Olivier in terms of respect in the acting world. She was seen more as kind of like the fluffy, floofy movie star, spoiled Hollywood starlet, although that was not her background. But they came together and they came together hard, and they worked hard and played hard. And I think both of them so deliver in this movie. I'm always blown away at how good they both are in this.
Do you want to know what's happened, George? Do you want to know what's really happened? It snapped. Finally, not me, it, the whole arrangement. Boy, you can go on forever, and everything is manageable. You make all sorts of excuses to yourself. To hell with it. This is life. Maybe tomorrow he'll be dead. Maybe tomorrow you'll be dead. All sorts of excuses. Then one day, one night, something happens and snap! It breaks and you just don't give a damn anymore. I've tried with you, baby. I really tried.
Come off it, Martha.
I've really tried.
You're a monster. You are.
I'm loud and I'm vulgar and I wear the pants in the house because somebody's got to. But I am not a monster. I'm not.
Everybody's so good. I mean, all 4 of them
Oh,
are
please.
phenomenal. But those 2, she's so good in this.
And then,
It's
like you said,
just- I can't believe it.
we talked about Father of the Bride last time we talked about Elizabeth
Yes,
Taylor.
indeed we
That's
did.
when she was getting married for the first time. And like you
To
said,
a monster.
to a horrible person. I think she said Mike Todd was her big love. I think it's Richard Burton. I mean,
Well, she married him twice.
yes, I think
She had 8 husbands, and this one's the only one she
Married
she liked so
twice.
much she married him twice. But Mike Todd was killed in a plane crash, right?
That's when
Yeah.
she went to Eddie Fisher, and then she
And
made
she left Eddie Fisher
for him.
for Richard Burton.
And Richard Burton, like Margot says, is like this very serious stage actor, very tall, very commanding, with a beautiful voice. And they had to talk them into taking the part. One, because he didn't want to play a wimp, and he thinks of George as kind of a wimp. It's a tough part to play.
Yeah, it is a tough part to play. There was somebody who was offered the role. Oh no, I'm thinking of Robert Redford. I think was offered the role of Nick,
and he said no
and
way.
was like, no thanks.
and I think he would have been fine. I mean, this is my big takeaway. I forgot how much of a crush I have on George Segal. He was a part of so many movies in the 70s.
Seriously, he's in everything, but he really is underrated. He is acting his booty off in this movie.
And Sandy Dennis, like, because this is not this is a thankless part. This
seriously, she is turning it out.
All these
when
people.
she's dancing like the wind, I all day. I could just watch that all day.
Violence.
It might be my favorite part of the whole movie is when she's like, "You don't understand how great a dancer I am," and she's just like twirling around on the edge. Oh, I love her. The whole thing. All four of them are so good. It is such A-level acting all the way across the board. It is such a thrill to watch these artists at the absolute peak of their game. It's just, I love this movie.
So Nichols,
and it's such a bummer.
It is a total. I'm going to warn you. It's a stone cold bummer. It's not 3 hours like the play. It's like a little over 2 hours.
No, but it's long.
But
for
it's
a movie.
intense.
It's intense. I remember at one point I was watching this. I was watching it and I was like, oh, okay, good. Because I'm like, okay, we got through that part. So we're almost to the end because I'm seriously like my day is ruined. I'm so bummed out. And there was 45 minutes left of the movie.
Yeah.
George,
Yes, love?
why don't you want to kiss me?
Well, dear, if I kissed you, I'd get all excited. I'd get beside myself, and then I'd have to take you by force right here on the living room rug. And our little guests would walk in, and, well, what would your father say about that?
Oh, you pig.
Oink, oink.
Fix me another drink, lover.
My God, you can swill it down, can't you?
Well, I'm thirsty.
Oh, Jesus.
Look, sweetheart, I can drink you under any goddamn table you want, so don't worry about me.
I gave you the prize years ago, Martha. There isn't an abomination award going that you haven't won.
I swear if you existed, I'd divorce you.
And just stay on your feet, that's all. These people are your guests.
I can't even see you.
If you
I
pass out
haven't
or
been
throw
able to
up...
see you for years.
Try to keep your clothes on, too. There aren't many more sickening sights in this world
You're
than
a
you with a
blank.
couple of drinks in you and your skirt up over your head.
A zero.
Your heads, I should say.
Party, party.
I'm really looking forward to this, Martha.
Go answer the door.
You answer it.
Get to that door, you.
To you.
Come on in. I said get over there and answer that door.
All right, love. Whatever love wants.
They come in hot. Let me
Yes.
just say, they come in fighting and drunk, and they're just building from there. It builds and builds and builds and builds, and you just think they cannot possibly get any worse, and they do. They get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until they get as bad as farther than the audience can even grasp. And it takes a while. It takes a while to do that, and somehow. And this is a tribute. This is not just the actors, but Mike Nichols does such a great job of giving the audience a chance to get some very deep insight into each of those individuals, all four of them, including Honey, who is nothing to write home about, if you read her on paper on the page.
Right.
And I love the way that he handles her character most of all, I think, because it is such a kind of a simpy, mousy, and that's what, like, basically we don't even know if her name is really Honey.
Right. It's just what he calls her. We don't know.
That's just what he calls her. But in this movie, you get these layers of this woman, and who is a young woman. She's entering into a society that's got all these expectations on her. She's got to try to fulfill all of them, 100% somehow. It's great. I love it. I just love it.
It's Mike Nichols. And they were nominated for 13 Academy Awards. Every category that I was nominated for, they could possibly be nominated for, they won.
The art direction is amazing.
Right.
The costumes are perfect.
The hair and makeup.
The lighting. The makeup. Yeah.
And
you really buy that they're that age.
Yeah, it's not hard. And supposedly she gained 30 pounds to be in that part. And she looks amazing.
Gorgeous.
She's so
she looks
beautiful.
like Kim Kardashian.
She is. She is Kim Kardashian.
Some little bags under her eyes.
The one so in the play, like I said, in most plays are the adaptations that you look at, and there's a bunch of them on YouTube you could look up or read about. They usually stick to the single living room kind of thing. But here they start at the college, so there's some outside, and then they move inside, and then they the way that they meet each other, George Segal and Honey, they're so like happy to be there. Like they think this is just like, this is a great chance to like,
ooh, we've been invited to the president's daughter's house.
Right. And Elizabeth Taylor, like you said, like they said that she didn't have the stuff in her. And like, she always says this is her favorite performance. And I just agree. Like
I see why. It's
she
phenomenal.
runs it like from the second she's on stage, like the second she's in the shot, you just completely are taken in.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Butterfield 8, which was the role that she was given an Oscar for.
It's not good.
It is not a good movie. It's not that her performance is so terrible, but the directing is so bad.
It's a sleazy.
It's such a schlocky, just sleazy movie. This is art. It's
well,
beautiful.
she almost died, so that's why. And she said that too for years. Like, I got that.
Yeah, that's why they gave her Butterfield 8 because she came super close to death, and they were like, "Oh crap, we haven't given her an award for anything. We should probably just give her one."
Yeah.
And it just happened to be the year that she made Butterfield 8. Detail of this production is so well done.
There's a whole thing where, here they actually do get separated and they're into different parts of the house.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I think it works for the movie. I think if we had stayed in the one room and the porch for the entire action, it would have been it's just too much. The idea that we not only go around the house, but there's a moment where they go. The moment where they're dancing with each other, where Martha's dancing with Nick, and where my favorite moment of Honey, where she's dancing like the wind, that happens at this roadhouse, and that they get in the car. The four of them get in the car, and they're all drunk,
wasted.
The four of them get in the car, and they drive down they like veer right, weave all over the road down to the roadhouse, and they have this the action gets further intensive. It adds to the danger and the intensity,
right?
And the building of like, this is not going to end well, people. What are we doing here? Don't go to the roadhouse.
Oh, they would make you weep.
You have ugly talents, Martha.
Is that so?
Don't encourage her.
Encourage me.
Go on.
I warned you, don't encourage her.
He warns you. Don't encourage me.
I heard him. Tell me more.
Well, Georgie boy had lots of big ambitions, in spite of something funny in his past, which Georgie boy here turned into a novel. His first attempt and also his last. Hey! I rhymed!
Yeah, you're right. Go on.
I warn you, Martha.
But Daddy took a look at Georgie's novel.
You're looking for a punch in the mouth. You know that, Martha?
Do tell. And he was very shocked by what he read.
He was?
Oh, yes, he was. A novel all about a naughty boy child.
I will not tolerate this.
Ah, can it?
A naughty boy child who, killed his mother and his father dead.
Stop it, Martha!
And then that they go back to the house after that. You're like, don't go back to the house with these people. What are you doing? It's great. It just so adds to and that's the direction again, that using that to build the audience. It's just such a pot boiler.
I like the roadhouse they go to that's completely abandoned. Like they're obviously closing any second.
It's got to be like 5 a.m. at this point.
And the owners are just exhausted looking.
Like, are you kidding us?
What? And they offer one more drink, so they give them that one more, and it's like the
just
silence
to get them
is
out
just
of there.
And you think like, okay, we're going to leave the house. They're going to go to this bar. There's going to be music. It's going to leave the pressure. It's going to relieve the pressure a little bit.
Oh no.
No. She starts dancing with him. And I love George Segal doing that 60s dance, like the clapping,
the jerk,
or the frug, whatever it is he's doing with her. And she's just, and then they're off to the side. And like you said, she and Richard Burton have this argument outside, and he pushes her against the car. And they're so in the scene, and she actually hurt her head. You could hear it. Like, it's alarming. It's
upsetting.
It's
Yeah.
upsetting, but she was like, keep it. That's the best take. That's like, it's not going to get better. Then they go back to the house. Why did you go back to the house? And then finally George tries to have sex with her. Doesn't pan out. She humiliates him as she sends him. And that's when
he's had it. He's done. Yep.
And
fun and games are over.
The fun and games are over, and I'm going to just tell everybody everything. And it's just so sad. And then there's this great scene where she's arguing, and then he's doing the Latin for mass, right? It sounded like a church thing, like a prayer or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that as she's saying it, and it's super, super intense. And then they sort of like, and then they break down, and then he says, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? And she says, I am. Because she, like, the sun's coming up, like you said. Where do they go from here?
I do not know.
Exactly?
First of all, who's going to clean up that house?
Oh my God!
I shudder to think. Just that alone, just the mess alone.
The art direction, like you said,
mess.
though, like the books everywhere,
so
and the Martha's Vineyard,
and the books are all messy.
Oh, and the dust,
the kitchen's a mess. When she's cleaning their bedroom, and she's just like shoving her dirty underwear like under the sheets.
I mean, my God! I mean, these people, like, they need a vacation. They need
they need a lot of things.
They need a lot of things, but all their illusions have been shattered. And like, how does everybody recover from that? And it's, I don't know, but it's so good.
It's really super good. It's just, it is a masterpiece, but it will ruin your day.
Yes.
Maybe don't watch it like in the middle of the day and then be bummed out for the rest of the day like I was.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it's just brilliant. It's a
masterpiece for a reason.
All the way around. And I love that, the takeaway is our roles, our mid-century gender roles are not working. These things are not working out for people. And let's maybe look at those again. Love it. And it's perfect. It's a great, great film of a great, great play. What can you say?
You got to see it, but we recommend. I'm not going to pick one over the other. I can't. The play is brilliant, and this movie is just, as I said, it is a masterpiece. It is fantastic, and
I mean, you didn't need to have Mike Nichols, but gosh.
And if you get a chance, his book that came out, it was a biography. He passed away a number of years ago, but there was a biography that came out a couple of years ago, and it's excellent about him. And it's just, his life is so extraordinary. And Nichols in May is something you should look up if you've ever looked. I mean, just nothing but Birdcage. I mean, oh my God, I love that.
He's so
movie.
good.
He's so good.
Me too. Yeah, I think a tie. I think we have to call it a draw for this one. What are we doing next?
Well, I pulled up. So I was in Provincetown, and it was very funny, Margot.
Yes, I saw it. It looked very nice.
I was there, and I was just looking at the bookstore, because I always do where I go. And there was this couple, and they had a young son, and he was get to pick out one book, for post-Christmas. Like, he had a gift card for Christmas. And they were like, well, what do you think of Captain Underpants? And he's like, I've never heard of it. And I turned right around. I'm like, oh, it's great. And I went right into my Captain Underpants spiel, because I was like, oh yeah, and it's a banned book, and it's a great movie. And they were like, the manager of the store went up and goes, well, sold, thank you. But I looked at their theater section, and I did buy The Whale, though I don't know that's neither here nor there, but I took a picture of the section, and there's all these plays, and of course it's Provincetown, so it's like Tennessee Williams, Harvey Fierstein, Neil, the usual suspects. You were saying, like, Neil Simon was someone you wanted to try next.
Yeah. I did think about Neil Simon. I'm trying to think which one. What about like the Goodbye Girl?
I think there was originally a movie though.
Was it a movie first?
Yeah, it was a movie first.
No. Boo.
Yeah, that's a boo.
No, no, that breaks the rule.
What about Biloxi Blues?
I do like Biloxi Blues.
I love Biloxi Blues.
That'd be good. Okay. I love Biloxi Blues. I think that will be a good one to do next. I'm trying to think if we've ever done any other Neil Simon, and I know
we did. Was it Barefoot in the Park?
Oh, yes, of course it was. It was Barefoot in the Park. Thank you. Speaking of Sandy Dennis. Now, she wasn't in the movie. She was in one of the plays.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say.
I remember correctly. I believe she was in one of the productions on stage.
I'm sure
Jane Fonda is in the movie. Anyway. Oh, The Out-of-Towners.
I do like The Out-of-Towners.
Yeah, but let's do Biloxi Blues.
Yes.
That is I love that one, and that will be a lot of fun to talk about because there's a lot of differences between the book and the movie, just production wise, and that'll be a fun conversation, I think. So, Margo, where can people find you on the internet these days?
You can find me at Brooklyn Fitchick for Twitter, as long as Twitter exists, by the way.
For now.
At Instagram, Brooklyn Fitchick. My site is brooklynfitchick.com. All my information's there. And I'm on TikTok at Margo Donahue. And where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all of my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And I also wanted to mention, just a real quick thank you to the education website Common Reader, who gave us a shout out. I think they're an Australian.
Oh, I saw
site.
that too.
Isn't that nice? They gave us a little shout out. They were suggesting, I guess in Australia, they're going on their summer holiday right now.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
So they were making suggestions like, don't just let your kids watch movies all summer long. Engage them in a conversation the way these two ladies do on this podcast. So thank you so much, Common Reader, for the shout out. Really appreciate it. That was a lovely surprise.
And we don't recommend kids to watch this movie.
No, don't. Yeah, this is not one you should watch anywhere in the world.
But we have
children.
Lots and lots of movies that are family friendly. So
we do.
We do appreciate. Yes, we do. Okay, we'll be back soon with a new episode, everybody.
Three couples, our best turnout yet. Why don't we go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why they're here. John, Gloria?
My name's Gloria. I'm here because Johnny Boy hasn't been able to cut it man-wise for some time. Not that I'd want his odor of gin and sour defeat pressed against me.
That's enough, Gloria. Thank you, Gloria. John, why don't you tell us a little about why you're here?
She never cooks. She keeps a filthy house and she talks profanely. She's the queen of the harpies.
No, I'm
queen
not.
of the harpies.
No, I'm not.
Here's your crown, your majesty.
Get away from
queen
me,
of the
you
harpies.
swine.
To the right place. First, I want you to look into each other's eyes.
Your eyes. I've forgotten how beautiful they are.
Let's never fight again.
We were fools to argue.
Well, let's not talk about that.
Let's not talk at all.
Remember my saving your lives and bringing you happiness when we pass the collection plate next week.
Thank you so much for listening to the Book versus Movie podcast. We are a part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You can find more podcasts you will love at frolic.media/podcasts. We follow the hashtags LadyPodSquad and Podern Family. If you want to support the show, you can go to our Patreon page, go to Patreon, and look for Book versus Movie podcast. We have a basic Facebook page, but we also have a private Facebook group. Go to Facebook and type in Book vs. Movie Podcast Group if you want to join that. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Book vs. Movie. Spell all those words out. If you'd like to send us an email, it's Book vs. Movie Podcast, spell that all out, at gmail.com. You can follow Margo D at Brooklyn Fitchick on social media and Margo P at She's Nacho Mama. Thanks so much again for checking out our show, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.